Thank you, Mary Marshall. Good morning. So the day I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur was the day that I cried on my commute. This might be the same day that you knew that you needed to be an entrepreneur. It was 2011. I was on my way to my job as a program director for l'Arche. And l'Arche is French for the Arc, and it's an organization that creates homes where people with and without intellectual and developmental disabilities share life together. So the shorthand version of saying that is that it's group homes as they were meant to be. They're loving and inclusive communities, and it was my first job, just out of college, to be a direct care assistant at l'Arche. I loved it. I loved living in this house. I loved helping people shower and get ready for their day. And it felt really meaningful to me, and I stayed for 2 years doing that. But then I got promoted. And being a program director, I did a lot less of what was meaningful to me personally and a lot more of what was meaningful to Medicaid. So I loved the l'Arche community, but I just did not love this role that I'd ended up in. But I had a lot of conflict about that because I thought, this is helping people that I love. This is creating their homes. And when I file for billing, this means that we have money to run our homes. So I could see the importance of it, but I struggled with this idea of, well, if it's important, then I should do it. But what if it's not what I need to be doing and what I want to be doing? So the day that I cried on the bus to work was a pretty typical Tuesday. I had to spend about 2 hours getting from point A to point B, going to meetings, doing paperwork, and then going to some more meetings. But as I rode downtown, I thought, why am I crying? This is not an exceptionally bad day. I'm so thankful. I'm so fortunate to have a good job and a bad economy. But then I realized I had received this email about a role-related training from my supervisor that day. And when I'd opened it, I had felt so angry. I had just felt like rage. And this scared me because I thought, what is happening here? Why do I feel this intense emotion? And on the bus, it occurred to me that this training that I was supposed to go to was a really great training for a program director. It would mean sitting in a room for 8 hours listening to the new rules about Medicaid regulations. The problem was that this was not a great training for me. This was not what I wanted to be doing with my life. And there was an overwhelming sadness in that, because if this wasn't what I wanted to be doing, then I would have to step away from an amazing community and people who loved and supported me. But that morning, a writer I followed on Twitter named Ash Amberger had tweeted, "What do you want to do? That's the only question you need to answer." And I had that in my mind, and the problem was that I did know what I want to do. I had known since I was 6 years old. I wanted to be a writer. So back in January 2011, a few months before the crying on the bus, I had taken a leap of faith and started my blog, which I named A Wish Come Clear. So my intention was and is to share my work, to create a community, to give back, and also to hopefully create a platform for book publication. Because in the publishing industry, they'll often tell you, unless you are a celebrity, unless you're famous, unless you already have a pre-existing platform, it's very difficult to get a book published. So the advice that's often given to young writers is build your own platform. And once you build it, then you are allowed to publish, or you can self-publish. So when I started the blog, I was still working full-time for l'Arche, but it helped me because it made me feel like a step in the right direction. It felt like, okay, this is what's important to me. I'm spending my days doing what's important to Medicaid and what's important to everybody else, but at least I was spending my free time on something that was moving me forward. Now that said, it was terrifying to try for something that I wanted that much, because what if I failed? But in a way, it was also impossible not to do it, because I had an increasing sense that, as Ferris Bueller once said, life moves pretty fast, and if you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. So that's the first lesson I want to share, even though it's one that you probably already know if you're here, which is have a healthy fear of missing your own life. So backing up a bit to what my work includes today. Today, my job description includes writing, blogging, authorship, and public speaking. But when I first started, my only goal was to earn enough money to buy groceries through writing. So that's what I did. I was just a digital copywriter. I wrote about pages for all my friends' websites. I picked up small gigs through blogging contacts. I went on Elance and wrote articles for $2, which I soon figured out was not a good sustainable business model, but I tried that. You know, you have to be willing to try things. Then, in a very fortunate moment, I used personal and professional experience to land an actual well-paid writing gig online. And it was a weekly column and features gig for a magazine called Autism After 16. And it was a great gig because I could use my disability-related experience with L'Arche, and I could also use my personal experience because I'm an older sister to a younger brother who's on the autism spectrum. And that magazine has since closed its doors, but that one account really carried my first 2 years of business. And I'm so thankful to have found it because that was the catalyst that allowed me to say to my husband, look, we can earn enough to buy groceries. If I just keep writing for them, even if I don't get anything else, this will carry us through. And I also, of course, did endless pitches to find enough client work that I could really know that I could quit my job and still make rent. There was not an abundance, there was never a ton, but there was enough. And I'm actually really grateful that we lived in an area with incredibly high rent and a very high cost of living because it forced me to sink or swim very quickly as a business owner. And so that's the second lesson I want to share, which is that oftentimes pressure can be healthy and there really is such a thing as a desirable difficulty. So this is a term I learned from Malcolm Gladwell's latest book called David and Goliath, which I recently checked out from our fine library right here. What is desirable difficulty? It's about how when you're forced to overcome adversity, you can access and grow skills that may have lain dormant before. Overcoming an obstacle really challenges you to learn out of necessity, and that kind of learning stays with you longer than the stuff that comes easily. So in a way, living in an expensive area, having to make over $1,000 of rent every month just right out of the gate, it forced me to be so proactive and to find more work than I otherwise might have. I had to put aside my fear. I had to put aside this feeling that I wasn't experienced enough and just do it. And that is another thing that I think can be extrapolated to pretty much any field. If you're scared to do something, but you know it's something that's really important to your business, purposefully create a condition that scares you more if you don't do it. So yes, I was scared of cold pitching and cold calling, but I was more afraid of having to tell my husband, we can't afford to live here anymore. So that is, that can be a step in the right direction. Create a condition for yourself that is what you fear, and then see how you step up into that. Now, that being said, there's also a balance. If you add too much difficulty, you're just going to get discouraged and you're just going to get disheartened. And so even when I started, it was very important to me to keep our costs of living as low as possible, because then I knew that I would have the freedom to do some creative work in addition to paid work. And that's part of why we moved to Florence, because we knew that we could live much more frugally and that I could have the time to develop personal projects and creative projects and not just be doing client work 8 hours a day. And also on the risk mitigation side, while I did quit my job, my husband still had his. So, we've done that dance of balancing, okay, you take the giant risk, all right, I'll be the steady one. And then we switched back when we moved here, when he wanted to renovate our historic home. And so I said, okay, I'll be the steady one, I'll make sure the income is there. You live your dream of renovating this space. And it's only now recently that we've both become breadwinners. So it's sort of a novel feeling of, what? You mean 2 incomes? This is nice. We also always knew that if worst came to worst, we could just take ourselves back to DC and beg for our old jobs back if things didn't work out here in Florence. So that is one nice thing to know. If okay, I have a marketable skill. If I'm a caregiver, in the back of your mind, okay, the worst thing that can happen is that I end up where I started. And that wasn't really so bad. So that helped us to take those leaps of faith. It also helped me to dare to invest in my blog. It's worth saying that I don't actually earn income directly from my blog. It's mainly a place where I can give and also hopefully build that platform to be published. But that said, it's also given me a great deal. On the most basic level, it allowed me to build my skill sets. So now when I talk to clients who want to build an email list, they want to grow their Facebook page, they want to get some momentum around what they're doing, I can say, I hear you, I understand, I've done this process, let's do it together. I started from scratch, I made plenty of mistakes along the way, but there are now over 1,600 readers on my email list and almost 1,000 Facebook fans. So baby steps forward, making progress. And thanks to the blog, I've also been able to meet some amazing people, see some opportunities. I write for the Huffington Post. I've given a TEDx talk. I had a post go crazy viral on the Huffington Post this past year with over 100,000 shares. And none of this would have happened had I not started with the thing that I loved and just moved forward with the blog. And it did not happen overnight. I mean, I've heard people say it takes 10 years to build a platform for publication. And when I first heard that, the competitive part of me said, okay, great, I'll do it in 5. Like, yeah, bring it on kind of thing. But now I think what they were saying is actually, 1, a pretty fair estimate, and 2, they were saying this is a marathon and not a sprint. And so I think that's one of the things you learn to balance in business of like, okay, what are the things that I need to just push hard and drive and like focus on just cranking them out and getting them done? And what are the things that I really need to be in for the long haul? And I need to invest a small amount of time every day and just keep moving forward. And those can be harder just to kind of keep the faith and just keep walking and keep moving. But knowing what those things are is helpful, because there were times where I got so discouraged and I was like, why isn't this moving forward yet? And then it was like, okay, well, a marathon doesn't, it lasts a long time. So have some patience with yourself and know what those things are. So here I should also mention that there's a good reason I've chosen not to monetize the blog. And it's because I earn income through speaking and through copywriting, and I want the blog to very much be a place where I am giving. And I think that's important to have a space where, okay, this is just about me putting my best work into the world and trusting that good things will come back to me through that. And it doesn't have to be an exact linear relationship. So in the present day, our home renovation is complete. So my husband, Jonathan, and I are working together. We build websites for nonprofits and small businesses. And our specific niche or focus is nonprofits that support people with autism and also local Florence area businesses. So on the surface, that might not seem like, okay, where's the overlap there? But I think finding a niche or a niche is really about the feeling that you and your clients are connected. You have this personal connection. And for us, for Jonathan and for me, that's meant being in the disability services industry because we have a strong personal connection there. And now, having lived in Florence for going on 4 years now, we have a strong personal connection to this community. And so it's about finding a place where you feel confident and you feel like, okay, I have things to offer here. I know this group and I care about this. Because you don't want to have to fake that, and you don't want to have to try and speak a language that you don't really speak. And it's felt very natural for us to serve those two groups because we speak those languages. So I will say, Jonathan and I provide communications and development services for nonprofits and small businesses. That's kind of the tagline. But Alan Tomlinson made a great point a couple weeks ago that what you think you're selling is not always what you're really selling. And so whenever I'm writing copy or talking to clients, I remind myself, yes, we're selling these practical services. We'll write your web page. We'll make sure your newsletter is interesting enough for people to want to open it. And we'll run your Facebook page for you so you don't have to learn social media. But the other part of it, really the deeper part, is that we are providing confidence. The moment I always think of is the moment when you're handing over your business card, maybe at an event like this, and you can hand it over without any sense of like flinching or cringing or like apology energy around it, of like, oh yeah, I do this, but like my website's not that great yet and I'm gonna work on it. Like, that kind of sort of shrinking into yourself. What I want for the people that we work with is to be able to say, here you go, check out our website. Just very simple, very clean, very like, yeah, I know it's good, and I know it's the best we can put out there. So that was so helpful for me of like, oh my goodness, on days where it feels like, okay, I just don't really feel like scheduling all these Facebook posts or doing whatever it is I need to do. It's like, okay, it's not about that. It's about giving someone this feeling of, I got this, and how that ripples into everything else that they do and how that is so powerful. And we found that especially in the special needs sector that a lot of times folks they don't have the money to hire a whole development team because they're too busy doing the actual work of caring for people. And so that helped us to position ourselves as, we're not just going to work for one organization a ton of our hours. We're going to be this development team for hire for a bunch of little organizations that, you need 5 hours a month, you need 10 hours a month. So it allows them to have a sustainable budget, but it also allows them to move forward with their websites, with all the things that they really need to do and that a lot of times aren't in their job description. So that connects to the third lesson that I've learned, which is you don't have to be perfectly qualified to start. Because when we first dove into this, it was like, yes, we have the hands-on caregiving experience. Yes, we've been in nonprofit management, but it was like, I don't know how to schedule Facebook posts. I don't know how to, write page copy. So I put myself through some classes, yes, but mainly I learned by doing it. And so this idea that if it is a reasonable leap, take it. And if your client says, I need this done, say, okay, I'm on it. And then figure out how you're going to do that. That has happened to us so many times. And it used to make me feel really uncertain. And now it's like, ooh, another expansion of our skill sets, or, another thing that we didn't know how to do last week that we're going to figure out because they need us to figure it out. That said, this concept can be particularly tough for women. And as Liz Gilbert said in her most recent wonderful book, Big Magic, which is available in the new arrivals section here at the library, she writes, I have watched far too many brilliant, gifted female creators say things like, I am 99.8% qualified for this task, but until I master that last smidgen of ability, I will hold myself back just to be safe. And she says, I can't imagine where they ever got this idea that they have to be perfect. And she was like, ha ha, just kidding. Just every single message society has ever sent to us in our entire lives. I think maybe that's where we picked it up. But she says that we need to break this habit in ourselves because we're the only ones who can break it. And that the drive for perfectionism is just a waste of time because, and I love this line, nothing is ever beyond criticism. And that's just such a freeing thing when you realize nothing is ever beyond criticism. You will always find someone who is willing to take down whatever it is you've worked on and loved, be it a product or a blog post or whatever. And when I got the chance to blog on the Huffington Post, I was thrilled. I was through the roof, and I'm so thankful for that, and I'm still doing it. But man, the first time I saw that comment section, I was like, oh boy, this is a whole different ballgame. This is like people I've never met, people who, have never read my work before, completely saying the opposite of what I was trying to say, insulting me personally, insulting my sex life. Stuff that I'm like, I never even saw that coming. I didn't even know. But that will happen, and that there will always be someone who's willing to criticize what you've done. But that shouldn't stop you, and that shouldn't hold you back. Another corollary and a fourth lesson is that it's really key, I think, in any business to expand your horizons and your notion of what is possible. And I say this, but it's so humbling because every time I think I've expanded my notion of what's possible, something happens and I go, oh, nope, I didn't think that was possible. And you discover these unconscious limits that you set for yourself. The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks is another really good book on this, also available just over there in the library. He talks about the idea that we unconsciously have these upper limits for happiness and success in our lives. And when we bump up against them, we unconsciously create like crises in, if you're doing well in your business life, you create a crisis in your personal life to keep you at a certain level of, oh, things are going well over here, but don't worry, they're not going too well because I have this problem over here. So I found that fascinating. But a way to kind of get out of this is to find people who will challenge you and be your devil's advocates. And I'm very lucky because my husband is a natural devil's advocate, and this is just like, he does this like breathing. It's just, he was born doing it. He was born questioning. He's a questioner. So when we were on our drive down to Birmingham, when I was giving my TEDx talk last year, I confessed to him, I said, Jonathan, I used to think that only special people could give TEDx talks. And he pointed out to me, they have to have real people up there. You know that, right? They're not like robots. So they have to choose actual humans. So why wouldn't they choose you? And that's the way he thinks. Why wouldn't they? And I think that's one of the greatest gifts someone can give you, is to have someone in your life who will say, well, why wouldn't your book make it? Or why wouldn't your blog get picked up? Why not? And when I shared the story of how I applied to do TEDx on my blog, I had multiple readers email me and comment and say, I didn't even know you could apply. I thought you had to be asked. And I think that is an amazing metaphor for life, because so many of us think that we have to wait around to be picked and to be asked and to be told that it's okay to step forward, and that we don't test those assumptions and we lose out. And for me, I'm so thankful, because the only reason that I even applied to do that TEDx talk was because a friend of mine, McGraw, who is an author, a motivational speaker, and a self-advocate on the autism spectrum, he posted in his Facebook feed, I applied to TEDx Morristown. I'm so excited. I'm pumped about it. And I saw that and I went, holy cow, you can apply to these things? I didn't even know. And so I messaged him and I asked him about it. And it turned out that very same day that he had posted about applying to his TEDx, I went to the Birmingham website and I saw the applications were closing that day. It was within about 8 hours, and I thought, all right, it's go time. I'm doing this. And I applied and I got it. And it was all because somebody opened that door for me and somebody shared their experience, and it challenged my notion of what was possible for me. Another big assumption to question that I have struggled with is the idea that building your dream is somehow selfish. And at the beginning, I felt so weighted down by guilt from leaving L'Arche, from leaving this position where I knew I was contributing to people's health and well-being, to doing something that on the surface, it seemed like, oh, well, this is just for you. So it felt like it was somehow less altruistic or less benefiting to the world. But, on a basic level, I started to see that my friends and my family, people were so excited for me when I made that step out. And that made me question, like, oh, I feel like I've created this energy just by making this choice, and people are giving me the feedback that, wow, this is, for them, this is that devil's advocate question. This is challenging their notion of what's possible. And so I thought, oh, maybe this is a little bit more of an act of service than I had thought. And that's part of what I love about being an entrepreneur, is that it gives me a way to serve and to contribute while also going after what matters to me and what my dreams are. But it took me a long time, and some days I still struggle with the idea that what I want is selfish, or that I'm not giving enough because I'm not miserable all the time, the way I used to be, a lot more miserable and a lot more physically ill and sick more often. It was like, well, did that mean that I was giving more? But I've since learned that, obvious point alert, acting in your own best interests actually underlies the most sustainable giving. And so the lesson I've learned is to be what's called an other-ish giver. And I take this term from Adam Grant's amazing book, Give and Take, which is, surprise, right over here in the library. You can check out, it's really good. He says that often we set up this duality and we think that we need to choose between giving to others and advancing our own interests. But it turns out that they're not mutually exclusive. You can have both self-interest and other interest, and that it's actually the healthiest possible combination. And so he writes, successful givers are actually just as ambitious as what he calls takers and matchers, and that self-interest and other interests are completely independent motivations. And this just blew my mind apart. Like, whoa, I thought of it as one continuum, like, okay, you're self-interested or you're other interested. But he's saying, no, in the healthiest people, you have both drives running parallel, not on opposite ends of the spectrum. And So he says being otherish means willing to give more than you receive, even as you keep your own interests in sight and you use them as a guide to choose when, where, how, and to whom you will give. So that just shattered my preconceptions, and I definitely recommend his book if you want to read more on that. It's also connected to what I'm learning now, which is, and this is, just a final point of, okay, these are lessons I've learned in the past, and here's where my current learning is, which is that it's really tempting for me to spend all of my time creating or working on my book and doing writing and speaking because these are the things that just light me up, and these are the things that I love. But I've realized that I need to balance that out with doing outreach and making sure to do the legwork that my writing actually gets seen because it is really seductive, this idea of like, oh, I'm just going to work all by myself and I'm going to create this brilliant thing, and it's all going to be in this little vacuum. And you do need focus time and attention, but there's also a way in which if you're not willing to take this risk of putting your work out there and seeing what people think, you're not getting feedback. You're losing your own motivation because you're not getting any response. And then you're also dishonoring your work because you're not giving it a chance. You're not giving it that boost and that chance to get seen. So that's been my struggle lately of learning how to do that in a sustainable and enjoyable way. And the last reframe I'll share is just this idea that like, I used to think of outreach as, okay, I have to become one of those people who's like, oh, look at me, look at my work, oh my goodness, like just very gregarious and very maybe a little louder than my normal volume would be. And I was so frustrated by that idea because it felt like I have to push my personality into this shape that it's just not, and that's just not me.
That would be awful.
I know, right? No, it's like I need someone else like that on my team to do it for me, and like, oh, I would hire you in a split second. That would be like, yes. But what I've since realized is like, well, what if I reframe this as, okay, it's not about pushing myself into this like super extroverted mode when I'm an introvert. What if it's actually about using something that does come naturally to me, like building close relationships? What if it's more about that? Because especially in the blogging world, once you are posting on big sites, you realize it's actually, there's a pretty small group of people who are sharing this content or who are in your sphere. And I realized like, oh, well, what if I just made it my work to be good friends and to contribute to their success and to, build a close relationship with them, and trusting that that's actually the most authentic form of outreach for me, because that is something I would do anyway. I would do it if it wasn't an item on my list. I would do it. I would comment on their posts and tweet to them and read their stuff just because I love it. I would just do that anyway. And so finding a way to reframe something that doesn't seem to fit you with something that you feel naturally gifted in, and that can really increase your motivation. Because, you can put something on your list day after day after day, but if you don't know the why behind why you're doing it, and if you don't feel the sense of this fits me and this fits who I am, it's so easy to just let that slide to the bottom, and you do things that are, oh, they still need to be done too. And I've heard this expression that, the best way to procrastinate is by doing other work. And it's true, because you give yourself the illusion that you're still being really productive, even though that key thing that you deep down you need to work on, it's right at the bottom of the list. So that was what I wanted to share, and the whole idea